All right, everybody, welcome to Shop Night AMA Garage. My name's Chris. I got Andrew on the camera right now. So tonight we're going to be restoring a 1954 to 1956 Chevrolet truck steering wheel. This wheel's in really good condition to start with. It's pretty filthy right now though. So we're gonna do a little bit of cleaning before we get to the restoration. But before we do the cleaning, I want to just let you know what I'm going to be using to do this restoration. So a lot of guys use JB Weld, and then there's a couple of kits that came out for repairing your steering wheel. They come with the two-part epoxies. I'm going to be using a two-part epoxy. This is called Quick Bond. It's made by a company called U40 Trondak. This is made for fishing rods. The guy that designed this was a guy by the name of Ralph O'Quinn, and he was an aerospace engineer. And he designed this stuff to use in the outdoors on fishing rods, and it's slightly flexible, but it's sandable and you can drill it, and it's supposed to hold up to all kinds of stuff. And I've used it myself on dozens of fishing rods, and it's fantastic. I've never used it on a steering wheel. This is going to be the first one, but I really think it's going to work out. And so we're going to do this with this epoxy, and I'll let you know in the future how things turned out. I've got a little black oxide powder that I'm going to dye the epoxy with, so that when I fill the cracks on this steering wheel, in the event that the paint that I put on wears down, you're not going to see the epoxy underneath because it's going to be just as black as the steering wheel is. So I've got a piece of cardboard here, a little bit of a little spatula. It's like a dental spatula for mixing the epoxy and applying it. I've got a small hacksaw for widening the cracks that are on this wheel. Not a ton of them, but there's a few. This epoxy cleans up really good with isopropyl alcohol. Denatured alcohol works just as well. So I've got some rags here. We've got some acetone to clean this wheel with. We're probably going to end up doing a little bit of soap and water and some acetone to get it really clean. You guys don't need to be seeing that because I'm pretty sure you know how to clean stuff. So pair of gloves. Gloves are always nice. And these right here, these are Kimtech Kim wipes. And what they are is a little paper towel, nothing major, but there's no lint to them. They use them for medical purposes. And so when you're building fishing rods, you want your finish to be perfect. Same thing on this steering wheel here. I'm just going to be real picky on it. When I go to clean up the epoxy with the alcohol, I'll use the Kim wipe and it won't leave any lint or any dust from the paper. So we're going to get started on this right here. I'm going to do a quick wipe down with some acetone. This wheel was pulled from a junkyard, and you can see it's got some rust to it and it's got some moss and everything growing onto it. But this acetone should take this stuff off pretty good. I mean, look at that right there. It is pretty filthy to start with. And you can see the cracks here. Definitely cracked. Not as bad as some wheels that we've seen, not as bad as some of the other wheels that were at the junkyard. So I was pretty happy that we found this. You probably noticed in the background was a nice yellow Chevrolet truck. It's a 1959 Chevy Apache 3100. That is going to be restored. That's what we're going to be doing here. There's a couple more trucks we're going to do as well. And we're just going to do a nice series on it just to make sure that everybody gets an opportunity to see how to do this. Yeah, this wheel is pretty decent shape, but pretty damn dirty. So we've got to do a little more cleaning on it. So we're going to take care of that and we'll get right back to you. Okay, everybody, we did a little bit of cleaning on this. Actually didn't use any soap and water this time. We did it with acetone and then a little bit of the alcohol afterwards. And it came out pretty clean. If we need to do a little spot cleaning afterwards, we'll do that. But for the purpose of what we're doing right now, you know, I want to show you what we got going on. So first thing I'm going to do, I'm going to take this little hacksaw and I'm going to go at these cracks here and widen them up. So bear in mind that your steering wheels have a metal core, and they put this metal core into a frame, into a form, and then they poured this plastic over it. And so you can sit here and you can cut on this and you'll cut down and you'll hit metal. And so obviously don't cut through the metal. We're doing this to widen up these cracks so that they can be big enough to accept this epoxy. And as you can see there, it's getting wider, a little bit bigger. I'm going to do that just a little bit more on this, just so that we can get in there. You know, it's a little messy. Looks like there's a little chip there, and so I'm going to cut that out as well. You can do this with a Dremel and a disc. They're a lot louder. You know, all depends on how much noise you want to deal with, if you're worried about it or not. So that one's a little messy. Probably come back to that. I'm going to do this one over here. It's a smaller crack, but we'll widen that sucker up. Make it big enough to accept the epoxy. Alright, so we've done a little bit of cutting on this and I've widened them up, and it's possible I didn't widen them enough, but I think that it's going to be okay. The only question I have, there's a little bit of a crack right here, and I think I'm going to just tackle that right now while you're watching. Didn't really notice it a minute ago. Hope I didn't cause it, but if I did, that's okay. That's what this is all about right now. We're going to be fixing stuff. Can't fix it unless it's broke. Alright, so there were a couple of nicks across the top here, and I thought, well, maybe we'll just sand it out and it would make it lower. And so I'm actually going to cut this a little bit away, and then I'm just going to build it right back up with the epoxy. I've used this epoxy here to build ramps. I've used it to repair stuff that didn't have anything to do with fishing rods, and it's held up for years. I used it to fix a mount for a transducer on a boat, and that's underwater all the time, and that was probably 4 or 5 years ago and holding up strong. Okay. Alright, so the epoxy we're going to be using, like I mentioned earlier, this is Quick Bond by Trondak U40. The gentleman that made this, Ralph O'Quinn, really nice guy. Fisherman, sportsman. You know, I met him, I spoke with him, and he was just a character. He's passed away a couple years ago, which is really a shame. Anyways, he formulated this to be used in the outdoors, and so the easiest way to do this is it's by volume. And so you get this spatula, and you know, the one thing that you always do, you always end up using more than you actually need, which, you know, that's okay. You want to mix it out, you want to measure it out by size. So if you want to make a circle and make it like a $50 or a quarter, if that's going to help you, then that's what you do. What I'm doing right now is I'm cleaning the spatula in between, because I don't want to introduce both parts together in one container. That would probably make it harden where you don't want it to harden. Okay, doesn't look like it, but one's vertical, one's horizontal. It's pretty much roughly the same. The one thing that Ralph did when he made this epoxy pretty forgiving. And so you don't have to be 100% perfect. And this stuff here, this is rod bond, but it's also quick bond. And so what it'll do is probably gives me about 15-20 minutes working time depending on the temperature. And so it's a little cooler right now out in our shop, but so it might be, you know, on the 20-minute side, but you want to mix this really good. And like I said, it'll start to firm up about maybe 20 minutes or so, and then it'll actually be firm enough, hard enough to sand probably in about 2 hours. We're going to let it sit longer than that. So I've got this mixed, and you see I'm cutting across the top of it, scraping it up, putting it down, cutting across the top of it, scraping it up, and I'm making sure that I got a pretty decent mix on this. You know, if this was a clear rod finish for the fishing rod guides, I'd be a solid 2 minutes of mixing, but don't need to do that with this. It's pretty forgiving. So this is black oxide powder, like I said. A lot of guys use different chemical tints. I mean, you can use tester's paint after you pour the oil off of it and just use the pigment. The only thing is, when you're using something liquid, if you put too much of it, it can affect the properties of the epoxy and it might take longer to dry. If you use powder, powder's just powder. Probably don't need to use as much as I just did, but it sure colored this, didn't it? You can't get any darker than that. So, matter of fact, it looks darker and shinier and nicer than the steering wheel, so might have to do the whole wheel with this. Alright, so what I'm going to do now is I'm going to take my spatula, take this epoxy, and I'm going to force it down into these grooves that I cut. I'm not worried about making a mess. Like I said, this epoxy cleans up really well with the isopropyl alcohol I got right there. So I'm going to do my best not to smear this stuff all over the place, and I'm going to try not to smear it all over the blankets we got underneath our table here, or on top of our table. So I am going to put a coat of paint over this when everything's said and done. Probably be some primer and some paint. But in the meantime, like I said, you know, dye this epoxy. When the paint wears off, it's not going to be exposing a lighter color epoxy or blue or gray, all the other color options that are out there. You want to build it up just a little bit higher than the crack that you've got, so that you can take it down, sand it down a little bit, level with the steering wheel around it. So I made that crack big enough for the edge of this spatula to go in if I need it to. It's getting forced in there pretty good though, so not too worried about that. Okay, this backside here, you can see I took a wedge out, and just going to build that whole thing up. Like I said, this stuff is sandable, drillable, but it's also slightly flexible, and I think that that's going to really help when this steering wheel is sitting in the truck going through heat cycles, when daytime, nighttime. We don't have any major terrible heat cycles here in Western Washington, but you know, it still gets warm inside. So you can see this is all built up higher than what it was, obviously. So I'm going to move on to this next little crack right here. Get that right into there, right into there. What I'm going to do after I get all this done is I'm going to dip my finger into the alcohol, and I'm just going to come across this. And a lot of guys I see, they use, you know, they're dipping their finger in hot water. Thing is, if you dip your finger in the alcohol, as long as you're not mixing it into the epoxy, it's not going to change the properties of it, but it's not going to stick to your finger. You're going to be able to move that epoxy around and then not have any issues whatsoever. Yeah, this is going in really nice. That was one of the things that Ralph did when he designed this epoxy. He made it as a paste, so it doesn't go anywhere. It stays where you put it. It's fantastic. It doesn't ooze out. I've seen some of the guys using JB Weld, and it was kind of liquid, not knocking JB Weld, I just didn't have any, and I had this, and I thought that this would work pretty good. But it was kind of liquid, and it ran a little bit. This stuff is staying exactly where I put it, and I really like it because of that. I'm holding it up away from the table. I just don't want to smear this stuff around everywhere, because right now it looks so much like black tar. All right, we got a couple more spots. Got this big one that I did, and I got those cracks on the top. See if I mixed enough. Starting to firm up a little bit, so may have to do another batch. No big deal. There's two big jars sitting there, so plenty of oxide to dye this stuff with. One tip you guys want to know is if you mix any two-part epoxy, always leave a little bit either in a mixing cup or on a piece of cardboard like that, so that you can check it to see if it's set up instead of having to check the repair job you did. It's a good thing these are just cheap moving blankets, because I've already smeared it. Alright everybody, so I've grabbed it a couple times, places I shouldn't, and it doesn't look like I've got enough epoxy, and it's set up pretty good. So what I'm going to do is we're gonna mix some more, and I'm gonna add some more to this, and we'll be right back with you. Okay, we've pretty much got all the spots done. I'm going to be taking these Chem wipes right now and using the isopropyl alcohol and just cleaning up some of the spots where I touched it and shouldn't have. I made quite the mess, but all of it's reversible, all of it's removable. You know, it just comes down to doing a little bit of sanding if you need. I'm going to take my finger now with some isopropyl alcohol, and I'm going to smooth a couple of these spots out. It's just going to make life a little bit easier for me later when I go to sand this stuff down. You can do a little moving with it, a little bit of shaping. It's really kind of handy, kind of nice to be able to do this. If you recall, I actually did some pretty good filling through there. Same thing across the top here. I did a lot of shaping, but this just smooths it right out, and it doesn't stick to my finger. There's just a little bit of transfer, and that's it. If you do this and it doesn't turn out perfect the first time, just do some more. Put a little bit more epoxy onto it, let it dry again. It's not the end of the world. Fortunately, you know, it's not hard. If you really screw it up and you don't like it, sand it all off, do it over. It's not gonna hurt. It's just a little extra work, that's all. This corner here is pretty messy, but I'm going to smooth this out really well. The epoxy is really starting to set up nicely, which I like, and it takes this This alcohol, it takes it pretty easy. It smooths out really well because it's a mild solvent with it, and it spreads it around, and it's just, like I said, it's keeping it from sticking to my finger. And so I can have a almost finished looking product. Not finished, but a lot better than it was a minute ago. All right, you can see that right now. Pretty shiny, not bad looking. What I'm going to do is I'm just going to set this down, and we're going to let it dry. So it's just a matter of waiting now, and then as soon as it's dry, taking a little bit of light sandpaper to it, shaving it down with a razor blade if needed, and building it up again if I need to do that as well. So we're gonna let this dry, and then we'll get back to you. All right, everybody, I'd like to thank you for watching. We're going to have another part to this video, probably a couple more parts just in case. And so I'd like you to come back, and what we're going to be doing is we're going to be taking the steering wheel. You saw that I smoothed everything out with the alcohol. We're going to be taking various tools and some sandpaper, smoothing it down even more until it's just perfect. It blends in with the steering wheel. So right here you see we've got 4 different steering wheels. One of these steering wheels is a steering wheel that we've already been working on, that you've already seen. The other 3 are going to be future projects that we're going to video as well, so that if you've got any questions or if anything's left unanswered, we can catch up with this in future videos. Right here, this is the steering wheel they've been working on, and here's a sneak peek on how things are going to be turning out. It looks really, really good. It's not shiny, but it's been smoothed out. So stay tuned for part 2, where we get to smoothing everything out and making it look one step closer to being a perfectly restored steering wheel. Thank you.